Hey guys, this is Mr. Davis again. So this is a video that I made to talk about um, uh, different ecosystems. What is ecology? What is the study of ecology? So in the next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the nature of ecology and how it's a study of connections. I will make reference to a couple of different biomes, a couple different ecosystems or environments that you may encounter, and I'll talk a little bit about them and how they function. A big part of this is going to be looking at how energy moves through an ecosystem. So that's energy that organisms get by eating or feeding interactions, among other ways. So we will look at that. We'll look at what an ecosystem needs to survive, and we're going to look at the levels of organization like population, community, ecosystem, etc. All right. So with that in mind, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the study of ecology and how it relates to our class.
So, first off, ecology is the study of interactions between different organisms and between organisms and their own environment or surroundings. All right. So, key term here is these interactions. So, how do the things interact with each other? What's consumed? What's required? Those kind of things. You have organisms, and any organism is simply a living thing in the environment. All right. And then the environment is pretty much all the biotic and abiotic things. Well, wait, hold on. Got to define those terms. So ecosystems are made up of biotic, which are living or once living things. And that can include stuff like the living organisms, the waste products of those organisms, the dead bodies of those organisms, how they're decomposed, how they're eaten, that kind of stuff. Those are all the biotic factors. Then you have the abiotic factors. And when you put that A in front of a word, what that means is without. So this is biotic or life, because biology, that's life. Abiotic, without life, or not living. And the abiotic factors are things like the rain. The water is not alive, all right? So that rain is an abiotic factor. The rocks, the geology of it, that's an abiotic factor. The sunlight, that's an abiotic factor. The sunlight is not alive. Now, these things are needed by the living organisms, but that's what ecology is. It's the ecosystem. It's the study of all of the living and non-living factors in an area. So some other key terms. So I want to start with some levels of organization here. You have an organism that is one living thing. So you have your organism, that's one living individual. Then the next level is the population, and that's all the members of a given species in an environment. So squirrels in a park, pine trees in the forest, frogs in a pond, all right, as long as they're all the same species. Then you have the community, and that's all the living organisms in the area. So that's the grass, the frogs, the dragonflies, the cranes, all that stuff. And then you have the ecosystem. That's all of these living things plus those abiotic factors. And then eventually you get up to the biosphere, which is all the living stuff on our whole planet. All right. So some important folks that are in any living system or any ecosystem. First off, you have your producers. So sunlight is the main source of energy for life on Earth. All right, we are getting a continuous supply of sunlight on our planet, and that is being harnessed by producers and turned into food. So the producers are also called autotrophs. And in most terrestrial ecosystems, so most terrestrial biomes, uh, the producers are going to be plants, and this could be grass, it could be trees, it could be ferns, it could be any number of these organisms, and they produce energy using light in this case, and you use light energy to create chemical energy. And that process, if we remember from the carbon cycle, is called photosynthesis. All right, so photosynthesis is the use of light to make energy. So let's take a look at photosynthesis. So plants and plant-like protists are going to be your major photosynthesizers. You also have some bacteria in there as well. All right, so photosynthesis uses light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and carbohydrates, or sugar. Most often, glucose is the first step in what's made because glucose is the most simple of the sugar molecules. It's the fastest and easiest one to make. So this is the equation that I kind of want you to remember. So it's 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 waters in with light energy activating it gives you 6 oxygen and 1 glucose. All right, so you have 6 6 6. Quickly, an easy way to remember this, we call it the devil's reaction. 6 6 6. Yeah, okay, look, it's dumb, it's stupid, but you're going to remember that now because it's dumb and stupid, and that's okay. All right, so that produces energy. That's carbohydrates. We can eat carbohydrates, we can eat glucose. All right, that's food for us too, but it's also food for the plants. So you have sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water coming in. You have oxygen and glucose as your outputs. Fantastic. But you also have chemosynthesis. Now, chemosynthesis is the changes that are performed by bacteria usually to use chemical energy to produce carbohydrates. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of weird, okay? This is found usually in extremely high temperatures and extreme environments. This is a general example of one of the equations for for chemosynthesis. You produce carbon dioxide, or sorry, you consume carbon dioxide, water, hydrogen sulfide, and oxygen at high temperature, and you can combine that into carbohydrates and sulfuric acid. So this requires a bit of oxygen to be there, but a lot of times that oxygen is available because of the chemical reactions going on there will release oxygen as a byproduct. Here's an example of a variety of chemosynthetic organisms that are all gobbling up sulfur in the water. So you see this deep blue color and then this green and yellow and red. Well, each one of those colors is a different colony of bacteria. So that bacteria is gobbling up that available energy at those high temperatures. This water is very hot. If you were to hop in that pool, you would die. Yeah, it would kill you. First of all, it's basically sulfuric acid. Second, the water temperature is about 90 degrees Celsius. That's 10 degrees shy of boiling. Most living organisms can't live at that temperature. That is considered an acceptable temperature to cook food at a lot of times. All right, this is an extremely high temperature and it is very, very dangerous for most known living organisms. But one day, somebody got the idea, hey, let's take a look inside this thing, and they were shocked to find life. Not only that, you can find life in a bunch of other places that uses chemosynthesis. So another place where you'll find this is the bottom of the ocean. These are deep ocean hydrothermal vents. So this is hot water boiling out of the ground. Up into the water column. The water coming out of here is actually above boiling. The inside of these gas vents have been probed, and the water temperature is several thousand degrees sometimes. And it's able to be that extremely high temperature because this is also under 2 to 3 miles under the ocean, so under a huge amount of pressure there. And it's an absolutely fascinating ecosystem. This wasn't discovered till 1983. We didn't even know this existed. A lot of scientists and other people at the time thought, there can't be much life at the bottom of the ocean. There's no sunlight, so there's no energy, so there's no ecosystem possible. Well, it turns out you've got tube worms that are 6 feet long that have chemosynthetic bacteria that live inside them that provide them with food. You've got weird coral-like organisms that soak up this hydrogen sulfide, and they've got living organisms inside of them that break this stuff down. You've got these crabs that crawl around and grow bizarre kinds of bacteria and algae on their arms. These guys were just recently discovered. They actually have hair on their arms here, and they're called Yeti crabs because they're all white and they're hairy, like the Yeti or the abominable snowman. These are fascinating organisms that are unlike anything we found on the surface. And there's a big question in ecology and evolutionary biology right now that asks, is this maybe where life actually evolved? Is this actually maybe where the first living organisms, the first bacteria may have actually evolved in these weird places like hot springs or deep ocean geothermal vents, and then it moved to the surface? Because chemosynthetic bacteria are older than photosynthetic bacteria. So this is a really cool section here, but that's just one way that we can make food on Earth, harvesting available energy. All right. So, okay, producers make energy. That was all talking about producers there. That was whole ecosystems that are supported by these producers harnessing energy and making their own food. They're oftentimes called autotrophs because auto means on its own. So those are autotrophs. Now we have consumers, also called heterotrophs. All right. These are organisms that rely on other organisms for their food and energy. So you've got an autotroph here, which is the grass, which is using light to make food. And then you've got a heterotroph here, and that's the cow, and it's munching on that grass and it's eating that. And then we eat the cow, and we also eat our vegetables. Eat your vegetables, kids. It's good for you. We eat the cow, we eat the vegetables, all those things. So we are heterotrophs as well. You are not able to absorb energy by photosynthesis. You are not able to perform chemosynthesis. So you are a heterotroph. And hetero means different. So that means different food. Something other than themselves is how they get that food. All right. So let's take a look at what's next then. All right, let's break down our heterotrophs. You guys should already know these terms, but let's go ahead and get a quick review. You've got your herbivores, and they're organisms that eat only plants. So this is a type of caterpillar. It eats the plants and eventually will produce a butterfly or a moth. Then you have animals that are carnivores. They eat only animals. And that's like this lion here, all right? Pantherus leo. This is the African lion, and it consumes other animals in order to eat. So those are carnivores. They eat only other animals and not. All right, guys. So if carnivores eat only meat and herbivores eat only plants, that covers everything, right? Well, do you eat only meat or do you eat only plants? I'm going to say no. So there is another group then. Those are things that will eat everything. And if we know our roots, everything is with the term omni. So omnivores means all foods. These are things that will eat all foods. And so a bear is a good example of an omnivore. Grizzly bears in Alaska, something like 60 to 70% of their body mass is gained by eating fruits and berries and bushes and things like that. Whereas the last 30 to 40%, depending on their body mass, is gained by eating fish. And that's what they have to build up in terms of that body mass before they hibernate. Well, you guys, in order to be healthy, you should also kind of have something that's somewhat omnivorous. I'm not saying that you have to eat meat or things like that, but humans actually seem to thrive pretty well when we eat a wide variety of different things. And it gets a little weird because what you have to sometimes include, if you're going to say omnivore, are things that eat stuff that are just not strictly plants. And you can eat stuff that's not plants that's also not animals. And that actually brings us to our last group. These are things that eat only stuff that is breaking down. So those are our decomposers. So that breaks down dead organic matter. Well, one of the great examples of a decomposer is a mushroom. Mushrooms are not plants. They cannot photosynthesize. But they're also not animals because they have a cell wall, but their cell wall is made out of chitin. or chitin or keratin, depending on the species. That's basically the same stuff that makes up insect exoskeletons, or the stuff that makes up your hair and fingernails. They have a cell wall like plants, but they have all the proteins and behaviors of animals. So they're a very, very interesting group, and we eat them. That's part of that whole omnivorous thing. But they will actually eat decomposing matter, and they will grow on dead trees. They will grow in dead leaves. They live in the soil. They are commensalistic a lot of times with plants too. There's many species of fungus that actually feed off of the tissues in living plants, but they actually just feed off of excess sugars. They basically suck sap out of the plant, and in return they pump water into the plant. So they live commensally with the plant. They basically both benefit from that. So there's a mutualistic relationship there. So good example there is mushrooms as a decomposer. This will also include a lot of bacteria and things like that. All right, so there we go. Those are our big groups of organisms broken down by what they eat in our food, by what their food is in our ecosystems. So let's take a look then what this means in terms of energy. And so the first part we're going to talk about here is this concept of feeding interactions. And what you need to know about interactions from feeding is energy in an ecosystem only flows in one direction. All right, it only goes one way. All right, energy comes in from the sun. It goes to the producers, the autotrophs. Then the heterotrophs consume the autotrophs, and it goes that way. And then eventually the decomposers break them down, and they'll return nutrients, but the energy doesn't go back in. All right, so we talk about energy, that's calories. Nutrients are things like minerals and vitamins. So remember our cycles: sulfur, carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, those kind of things, not as energy, but as raw materials. That's the nutrients I'm talking about there. They can be cycled and move around. All right, so in a food chain, in a series of steps, which organisms transfer energy by being eaten, and which ones transfer energy by eating? And that's what you're looking at in a food chain. So arrows in a food chain then will show how that energy is transferred. And I've got a little graphic for you. You'll start with the producer and you'll end with the top consumer. So here's an example. You start with grass, which is your producer. Grass is eaten by crickets. Crickets get eaten by frogs, and then raccoons will actually eat frogs. So there we go. The energy goes from grass to cricket, cricket to frog, frog to raccoon. All right, and that's a very simple food chain or just food chain, because this only shows one interaction. All right, simple way of showing that. And I'm sure you guys have seen the food chain before, and you know that is, the little fishies get eaten by the big fishies, the big fishies get eaten by, the birds or whatever. All right, so that's that kind of interaction there. Okay. All right, guys, that's actually what I want to show you there to introduce ecosystems. When we come back, what we're going to need to talk about is some things to tie all this together. So issues like laws of thermodynamics. You heard about those in the Bozeman video. And one law of thermodynamics is energy is never created or destroyed. It's just rearranged. Well, you should be able to spot where that's happening in here. But our second law of thermodynamics, every time you have a change in energy, some of that energy is going to become unusable, not useful to the organism harvesting it. So what happens to that energy? Where does it go? And how much of it actually gets passed on up the food chain? So that's going to be a big part of the next lesson. All right, guys, that's all for today. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye, guys. So first off, take a look at this. You remember that I talked about food chains in the last video. Well, here we're not looking at a food chain because a food chain shows just a single interaction. This right here is going to be a food web. It is a network of food chains. It's like if you had a bunch of chains all tangled together. All right. You still start out with your primary producer, the grass, but that grass is eaten by more than just one animal. So which of the organisms here is the producer? And that's going to be your grass. which ones are going to be your consumers? Well, anything above there is going to be a consumer, so which one's your top consumer? And that's going to be your hawk. So that is your top consumer. The hawk eats highest up on this food web. All right. So let's organize this a different way. All right. We need to introduce this concept called a trophic level. All right. Now, a trophic level is the level of that food chain or food web that you're on. All right. Your first step are your autotrophs. These are the ones that make their own food, either through photosynthesis or through chemosynthesis or some other means like that. They are your producers, and they are labeled as such producers. Sometimes you'll see the name primary producers, but you need to know the first level of all the trophic levels is always the producers. Level 2 are your primary consumers. These are your herbivores. All right. These are going to be the ones that eat just the producers. All right. Now, here's the thing. They are consumers. They are the second level of the trophic pyramid, but you need to know that they are called primary consumers. Primary consumers are on the second level of the trophic pyramid. I'll say that again. Primary consumers are on the second level of the trophic pyramid. So keep that in mind when you're talking about what level and where they start. On the third level of the trophic pyramid, you have your secondary consumers. Basically you just subtract 1 at this point and they're on. So these are going to be your carnivores and generally your omnivores. So a lot of times we kind of sit somewhere around this secondary consumer level, but we're a little weird as well. Level 4. You have your tertiary consumers. Tertiary meaning 3. These are usually your top carnivore. And a lot of times we sit here as well. It really does depend on what our food choices are. So if we choose to eat something that is an omnivore or a carnivore, we're a tertiary consumer. If we eat something that's a primary consumer, we're a secondary consumer. If you are vegetarian or vegan, you might even be sitting down at a primary consumer level. All right. You, as an omnivore, have the ability to move up and down a little bit in that trophic pyramid. And those food choices can make a difference in impact on the environment. And when we talk about food, this is going to be a big deal. All right. Okay. So let's marry this to food webs. So your food web right here where you got hawks and weasels and raccoons and mice and all that good stuff, right? Well, guess what? Those can fit really nicely right onto a trophic pyramid. So you have your producers down at the bottom. That's your grass. That's the same for both of those, right? Then your primary consumers at your second level, your primary consumers at the second level, those are going to be your herbivores, and that could include mice and rabbits, and heck, even big animals can be primary consumers, like horses. Horses are obligate herbivores. They are not omnivores. They can't eat meat, so they're herbivores. So they're obligate herbivores, but they're big animals. Heck, largest living land animal is the elephant, the African elephant. It's a primary consumer. All right. Above them, you have your primary carnivores, or more often called your secondary consumers. Now, your secondary consumers are generally going to be carnivores. They may be omnivores, and they're going to eat your primary consumers. And then above them, you have your tertiary consumers. Now, in some food webs, you can go up to tertiary quaternary, which is 4. I'm sure that pentenary consumers exist, but at that point it starts getting a little esoteric, and it applies, and what that means is it applies just to a very specific food web. All right, so you can marry these food webs to this trophic pyramid. Okay, so if we're looking at these ecological pyramids, we have a diagram here that shows the relative amount of energy or organisms contained at each trophic level of a food chain or a food web. And remember that trophic level is just the level that they're at, starting with level 1, the base being your primary consumers, or primary producers, level 2 being your primary consumers. Sorry, one take. I did this in one take. All right. So If we look at our ecological pyramid, then that's going to look at the relative amount of energy. And if you look at the mass of a pyramid, and I've got a little bit of a distorted version of it over there, but that actually illustrates my point pretty well. The biggest mass, the largest section of any ecosystem has to be your primary producers. You have to have more producers than you have consumers, all right? Because if you have more consumers than producers, you run out of those supplies. Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about this in reference to people? If you go back and you remember the ecological footprint, if you're consuming more than what the earth produces, if you're consuming more resources, more services than what the earth can produce, you run out and then you start causing ecological damage. If you have too many hawks and not enough mice, eventually that hawk is going to run out of food and maybe has to go to a new territory, or it starves and dies. That right there is the same thing you're going to see in this ecological pyramid. And this is all about energy. This is all about the amount of available energy. So remember, Earth is a mostly closed system, so the amount of mass on the planet isn't going to change, ever. All right? You might get some small inputs from space, but they're negligible and they don't really count for this discussion. All right? The mass is going to stay the same. So the total mass of things in the biosphere is the same. However, the amount of available energy that you get from consuming food, that's what changes. So your primary producers are taking in that energy that's coming in as an input from the sun, because energy is an open system. Mass is a closed system. Energy is an open system. And then a portion of that, when those primary producers get eaten, gets passed up to the next level on the trophic pyramid. It's about 10% goes up. All right? So this is going to lead us to this next part. So if you marry these two together, you can see how that works. So it shows the relative amount of energy at each trophic level. So organisms in a trophic level use the available energy for life processes, such as growth, or photosynthesis, or cellular respiration, or metabolism. And they usually will produce as a waste product heat. This is the second law of thermodynamics. Every chemical process that happens in your body releases heat as a byproduct. So when you work out like real hard and you get all warm and hot, you're producing heat as a waste product of that metabolism action there. Okay? So that's that second law of thermodynamics. You can't reuse that heat as energy to fuel you. You can't become more energetic from your own waste heat. It doesn't work that way. All right? So that's that second law of thermodynamics, that in any energy transformation, a portion of energy is lost as heat to the surrounding environment. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't cease to exist. It just becomes unusable. So here's the rule about that. It's called the rule of 10, or the 10% rule. Know it by both of those terms, rule of 10 or 10% rule. 10% of the available energy produced within a trophic level is transferred to the next highest trophic level. Only 10%. So 90% of that energy is lost to the system, or used within that trophic level for the purposes of growth and maintenance and waste heat and those kind of things. So only 10% moves up. So this is a cool little thing that when we start looking at, say, eating beef, it takes about 10 pounds of grass. All right, so if you've got a cow that's just out there grazing naturally, it takes about 10 pounds of grass in order for that cow to put on 1 pound of mass, of material. That's a lot. So the biomass pyramid then represents the amount of living organic matter at each trophic level. Wait, the energy and the mass are linked to each other? Heck yeah, they are! Look at that, guys! So the energy pyramid and the biomass pyramid are actually linked together. They both follow that same 10% rule, which makes it very easy for you guys to follow this. So if you've got an FRQ question, or a, paper 2 question or something like that that says, oh, this environment produces this many thousand kilocalories, how many calories go up to the second trophic level or whatever, you just divide that by that 10%, all right? Just move the decimal place over 1, chop off a 0, whatever, all right? If they say, hey, there's this many pounds of wheat produced or whatever, and it's all fed to cows, and assuming 100% of it is fed to the cattle, then how many pounds of beef could you raise with this? Hack off that 10%. There you go, all right? That is how you can marry those two together. And you can use this to really help you out with a lot of stuff. So just keep in mind, every time you go up a trophic level, only 10% moves up. 90% of it, gone. Simple way to do this mathematically, like I said, just divide by 10. Done. Easy peasy. All right. So we compare these together. It represents the amount of energy available at each level, as well as the amount of living tissue, and both decrease as you go up that trophic level.